special treat too today. I think our friends from the Highlands Ranch office may be joining us for this call as well. So,
oh, nice, great.
So Damian, you'll be able to kill a couple of birds with one stone here and chat with a lot of us at the same time.
Yeah, they're gonna love me, let me tell you. So I'm gonna be gloom and doom because that's my job. So and for the record, Ryan started this fight. So
I did. Listen, I came hot. I've still got a few bullets left in the sling.
I don't think so.
Despite all of this, we are excited to have you here today, Damian, to help us cover our businesses and proceed safely through this kind of crazy real estate market right now.
Yeah, what I want to do is just give you guys a lot of things to think about when you're advising clients. And I know Ryan's goal, even though we like to square off on this stuff, is ultimately he's trying to figure out how to help his clients, which is a good end goal. We just got to make sure we're doing it without creating liability. So,
right.
So we're going to talk about it because there's a whole lot of liability sitting out there right now. So, and it scares the crap out of me. It really does.
Love it. Well, Damian, here we go. I mean, it's all you. We've got whatever your agenda is for the next hour, or as long as you'll give us.
Okay, so I will give you an hour. Well, I'll give you up to about an hour because I got another one of these at noon. But so guys, the reason has anybody seen that I changed the advisories? Did everybody see that I changed? I know you guys are so excited when I change legal documents. You're like, okay, I don't really care. Just tell me what I'm supposed to have my client sign. I get it. But I want to explain why we ended up changing those and what I'm seeing in the market and what I'm concerned about. So the reason we changed it is that has anybody noticed, Ryan, that there are appraisal gap guarantees?
Yeah, I hate them. I hate every minute of it.
Yeah, our market is batshit crazy. You know, sorry, that's legal jargon, but I mean, we have buyers that are competing for properties. We have sellers that seem to feel like they're entitled to more than what their property is worth. We have people doing crazy stuff like waiving inspection. You're a buyer and you're waiving inspection. And I want you guys to see where we're at right now. And I'll tell you, I'm not an economist. I've read a whole bunch of stuff on the economy and what's coming and everything. And I'll tell you, the range is broad. There's some people that say, oh, we're going to emerge from pandemic and it's all going to be great and everything's going to go back to normal, to other people saying it's Armageddon coming. And I don't know which it is. I'm sure it's somewhere in between. But I want you guys to see what we are dealing with right now. And these are just facts. Okay, so right now we have about 2.5 million people that are on forbearance agreements. During the pandemic, we also passed an eviction moratorium, and we also had a foreclosure moratorium in place. Eviction moratorium, incidentally, was scheduled to end today, but they actually, CDC extended it to June 30th, despite the fact that 2 federal judges have found it unconstitutional. So there's going to be some legal fights over this as to what happens. It's not in Colorado right now. The one case is in Texas. I'm not sure where the second one is. But I imagine there's going to be a lot more. We're going to hear about this. The foreclosure moratorium is a little different. They extended it to June 30th. It hasn't gotten, the banks have not been pushing back on it as much, namely because FHA and VA are quasi-government, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac are quasi-government. I'm sure the banks are getting some kind of assistance. They haven't been pushing as hard, but at some point, all of these programs have to end. Okay, they just have to, because at this point, you're asking landlords and banks to take the blunt, or the taxpayer to take the blunt of the economic loss on those things. Additionally, we have unemployment insurance that is currently running at a $300 a week addition for people unemployed. Unemployment rates at 6%. They figure it's probably double that if you get to the real unemployment of people that haven't been looking for jobs. You have a whole bunch of office space that has been vacant, businesses that have closed or not survived this, PPP money that runs out, loans that companies have been getting that runs out. And I just want to paint a picture that there's a lot of things that the government has been doing with interference to try and prop up our economy that at some point has to end. And when that ends, something is going to change in our economy. And right now, what I see happening is that, in a normal functioning economy, we'd have people that got behind on mortgages or everything, and they would sell prior to being foreclosed on in order to realize their gain. And then we'd have some inventory from those things. Because the government has put a foreclosure moratorium in place and there's forbearance agreements, those people that may have sold or put their houses on the market earlier are not doing it because they don't have to. And what concerns me is that at some point we are going to see an influx of inventory. Now, I don't know. So right now we're on this rocket ship, right? We're headed up like this. You know, we know about waiving inspections and appraisal gap guarantees and just this crazy stuff that buyers are doing, and also crazy stuff that sellers are requiring in order for it to get property under contract. At some point, it will change to either this or this. And I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't know how much it's going to change or anything else, but this is not sustainable. Okay. And that's what I want you guys to see, is that the market we're in, it's not going to stay like this for the rest of forever. At some point, it will change. And the point of me saying that is this, is that right now we have people doing foreclosure gap guarantees, and we have people that are waiving inspections just to try and get their property. And I want to talk about what that means to the buyer. Okay, so a buyer, what's the maximum, by the way, what's the maximum appraisal gap guarantee you've seen? Donna, what's yours?
I've seen it as high as 100,000.
Ryan, what did you say? I can't hear you. Unmute. Yeah, I know you know how to talk on these things. Apparently not.
Okay. Sorry, I got muted. $285,000.
285. I've seen 300. So yeah, $300,000. Now it was on a one-something million property, but $300,000. Now, guys, I want you to understand what a appraisal gap guarantee means. So what appraisal gap guarantee means is that the buyer is paying more than the property's worth. That is what it means in our world. And what I'm hearing is that brokers are starting to tell buyers, oh, hey, don't worry about the appraisal gap guarantee because the market's going up. And if you buy this at $60,000 over the appraised value, then your house becomes a comp, and then your house is worth $60,000 more. That's is not true. What's that, Ryan?
That's not how it works.
No, I know, but that's what I'm hearing. In fact, I had a good broker call me and say, Damian, well, you know, I've talked to the appraisers. I'm like, oh, goody. You mean the appraisers? Yeah. Okay. The appraisers. And the appraiser says, you know what, Damian, you know what, if it's the broker, he told him, says, yeah, you know, this, I have to look backwards. I can't look forwards. So yeah, when it sells, this becomes a comp and it's worth that much. And my simple question was, that's great. Is your appraiser going to pay when the buyer loses this money? Because they're going to sue the broker. Does everybody see where this, at some point, somebody's going to have a $60,000 appraisal gap guarantee, and they're going to be the end of the market when it changes, which means that $60,000 is flushed down the toilet. Okay. For all intents and purposes, that's what this means. Maybe it catches up, maybe it doesn't. And I just want to make sure we understand that. And Donna, you remember the days of 2009? Let's go back to 2007.
Yes, 7.
Okay. Do you remember in 7 when everybody was saying, oh my gosh, you have to buy now or you'll never be able to buy property ever again because it's going up so fast, you'll never be able to get into the market. Do you remember those days?
I do. And we're still here, aren't we?
Well, now we're back there.
Yeah.
So now what happened in 2009?
It all burst.
Yeah, the bubble burst, it fell out. Now keep in mind, that was created by mortgage companies and
Correct.
ninja loans and all those other crap that they were doing. But nonetheless, it burst. And all of a sudden, a whole bunch of people got clobbered. Now, who took the blunt of the blame for the Great Recession?
The real estate agents did.
Wasn't the agents. They survived.
Mortgage brokers, and the
Mortgage
appraisers.
brokers. Yeah.
The
that's
appraisers, actually, Kelly, it was
Yeah.
the appraisers. That took the biggest hit. Remember, there were all sorts of complaints that were filed against them because they were over appraising properties because they were trying to appraise them at the contract prices and they couldn't do it. And they shouldn't have been doing it. Instead, what they did is, so they did it anyways, thinking, oh, well, you know, the market's going to catch up, and they got killed. Does everybody see what is going this time around? Is that the appraisers are like, we're not going to be the sacrificial lamb this time around. We took too much of a beating, got too much regulation on us. We're not going to be the ones that take the hit this time.
And they're highly regulated because of that burst. And it's almost impossible to get your appraisal license now based on the regulations that they put into place. So we'll see what hits the fan this time.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though, is that's why, though, is because they got hammered over the Great
They did.
Recession. The banks took a beating too because they put loans out there that they shouldn't have put out. So this time around, what we're seeing banks making loans based on appraised values that aren't the same as the contract price. That's the byproduct of appraisal gap guarantees. So when this market levels out and somebody pays $60,000 over the appraised value and they can't get it back because now their company's making a move or whatever happens, or they get laid off or whatever, does everybody see where it won't be the banks and the appraisers that get hit this time around? It'll be the banks and the brokers that it'll be the buyers that take the hit, or the new homeowners. And then they look to the brokers to potentially blame them if they have a reason to blame them. I just want you guys to see what I see coming. Okay.
Damian, I think some of it's already coming. Like, we had a sale recently where the sellers are basically going to walk away with $3,000 because they way overpaid for a condo 2 years ago that hasn't increased like the rest of the market.
Yeah, well, and we're going to keep seeing that. But like I said, what we got to look at is the fact that, I mean, it's going to get worse. And it's not that the banks are going to take the hit. It's that these buyers paying these things are going to end up taking the hit. And guys, I don't know. It might be 2022 before this happens. It could be next week.
Damian, you do know that the feds do audits on loans. And if they see there's a huge gap between what they pay and what they, agreed upon versus what they actually brought to closing, there are going to be some audits on that. And they're going to call the buyer and say, who suggested that you put this much money higher than what you agreed upon prices, and raise your hand if you're the agent. And they're going to come back to haunt you. They did in 09, 010, and 07, all the way through that time frame. They did audit us. So
but the thing is, Don, is that if the buyer makes the decision, that's what they want to do, and we're giving them good advice, that's not our fault.
I know, but what buyer is going to say, oh, my agent told me to do this or I wouldn't get the house. And we all know that's going to happen. Well,
that's why we have the advisories, because that's what's in there, guys, is that I put in that this is a risk. Okay.
Right.
But I want you guys to see where this risk is. I'm not as worried about the audits on our files. What I'm concerned about is buyers making claims against us when they can't sell their house because they need to get out. That's where my concern comes from. Okay. I'll tell you a couple things. Number one, if you represent the buyer and the seller makes you waive inspection, tell the buyer to get an inspection anyways. Yep. Okay. I mean, that's just because they don't want to buy a pig in a poke. It's better to know and give up your earnest money than it is to buy the property, rely on a seller who moves to Nova Scotia, and then find out they didn't tell you everything about the property. Does everybody see that when you're representing the buyer? Advise them to do it regardless if you have to do that. Now, I'm hearing most sellers are not making you waive inspections, and that's probably a good thing. We'll explain why here in a minute. But the other one is the appraisal gap guarantees. I mean, you got to have that conversation with the buyer about the fact that, look, as of the day of closing, you are paying $60,000 over what the appraiser says the property is worth. Understand that's a risk. Does everybody see that? And I think it's pretty straightforward from a buyer's perspective, but I want to talk about this is a risk to sellers too. And that's something we don't think about. Okay. So a couple things. Number one, if you represent the seller, never, ever, ever let a buyer waive inspection. And the reason for that is because it is caveat emptor, which means buyer beware. But if you take away a buyer's right to inspect or take away the inspection opportunity for them to terminate based on inspection, what you're essentially doing is putting the buyer in a position where they come back and say, the sellers made me waive inspection so that I wouldn't find X. And we're in an area where we have people paying $60,000 over the appraised value. Do you think we might have high amounts of buyer's remorse in this market? Okay. If the market changes and then they look down the street and they see a house that's just like theirs going for $60,000 less, does everybody see where all of a sudden they're going to be like, wait a minute, I overpaid for this property and I don't like the payments. And I mean, the street
How do
noise
I
is
get
so
out of
loud.
it?
What's that?
No, I'm saying, how do I get out of this? Right.
Well, yeah, nobody wants to take responsibility for their own decisions. They're going to start looking around for people to blame. And and by the way, if there's something wrong with the property, the buyer will find out about it. Does anybody know how?
Neighbors?
Yes, Sienna, but it's neighbors with a bundt cake. And that's the most important part of this analysis is they always bring a bundt cake. And when they bring the bundt cake, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you bought this property. I mean, these guys had all sorts of problems with the sewer line or whatever the case may be. And they're going to find out about it. And we're in an area where people are overpaying for property. Now it may catch up and it may be fine and they may get their equity back. But right now they're overpaying for property. And so we need to keep in mind that the buyer's remorse is going to be heightened or worse than normal, and advising our sellers about the fact that, look, you're charging a premium for the property. Keep in mind that, the buyer after closing may get buyer's remorse and look at suing somebody. So we got to be extra careful in how we treat that buyer. Is everybody following me?
So Damian, what happens if the buyer voluntarily in their initial purchase contract doesn't put any deadlines in for inspection, and
Put it
it's
back
not
in.
this, do a counter and put a termination deadline
Absolutely.
in?
I'd say, hey, that's very nice of you for taking out the inspection. We really do appreciate it. However, we're going to give your buyer a right to inspect. We're only going to give them 3 days, but we want to make sure that they have an opportunity to go do any inspections they want to do. My seller isn't hiding anything, but he wants to make sure that the buyer has an opportunity to find things that maybe the seller doesn't even realize are wrong with the property. Now, keep in mind, we're probably not going to fix anything, but we still want to give you that right. I would put it back in every single time because it's still dangerous to the seller because they all get amnesia. They're going to forget. They're going to say, oh, well, the listing broker told us that we had to do that in order to get our offer accepted. So that's why we made our offer that way. Everybody gets amnesia. And so that's why I would always put it back in. You don't have to give
let me ask you this, Damian. If they have just inspection termination, right? So no objection or resolution, just termination. Are we good there?
Yeah, I think that's okay. I'll tell you, I don't like it, Michael, just my opinion of it. And the reason I say I don't like it is because at some point, what happens if the market shifts and you represent the seller and you've got appraisal gap guarantee that this buyer may go through with, okay? And you take away the objection. What happens if it's something stupid like a roof that's paid for by insurance? I mean, wouldn't you rather have the buyer object to something that the seller is going to have to fix anyways and come up with a resolution to keep that guy in the contract instead of giving him the only option is to terminate? So I like leaving the objection just because who knows what they're going to come up with and may or may not be acceptable to the seller, and just advise the seller, look, you don't have to do anything. But do you see what I'm saying, Michael? I mean, what you're saying works, but I don't like it from a practicality standpoint. I'd rather give you guys an opportunity to negotiate solutions. And putting in a termination deadline doesn't give you that opportunity.
Hey, Damian.
Hold on. If you represent the buyer and that's what you have to do to get your offer accepted, totally get it. I'm talking, we got to keep in mind, we're looking at this through two different lenses. One is representing the sellers and one is representing the buyers. And when you're representing the buyers, you have to do crazy things and advise your clients. When you're representing the sellers, it's a different lens. Does that make sense, Michael?
Yep.
Anybody else? I heard somebody and I couldn't figure out who it was.
I got a question, Dave.
I got it.
Ricky, go ahead.
Actually, probably all of us do. My question is, what are your thoughts on putting something in the contract offer that says we're leaving the inspection dates in their objection, resolution, termination, and the buyers will not, per contract, ask for anything that wouldn't cost at least X dollars to fix?
Oh my gosh, I love those clauses. That's sarcasm, Ricky. That's sarcasm.
Okay, why do you?
My favorite is we're only going to ask for health and safety.
Health and safety.
That's already in the contract offer anyway. It's redundant. But what if
No, as is already in the contract. But
Right.
I like the ones that says buyer will only ask for health and safety issues. Oh, swell. What's health and safety issues? Does anybody
Everything.
know?
nobody knows?
I mean,
Whatever a buyer
Totally
decides
ambiguous.
is health and safety to them. It's
Well,
Totally
it's-
yeah, I
ambiguity.
mean, I judge, I guess, gets to decide that if you want to go that far. But and Holly, you made a point, and I agree entirely with you. Here's my point: is that you got to remember when you're representing the buyer and you put in health and safety issues, and maybe that's what you have to do to get your offer accepted. And if that's what you need to do, that's fine. But advise your buyer when we put in health and safety, your definition is not the same as the seller. What the seller hears is, well, unless the roof is caving in and the foundation is falling down, it's not a health and safety issue. That's what they hear. Likewise, if you're representing the seller and you see this health and safety issue, I tell the seller, look, I can turn anything into a health and safety issue. Okay. Hey, there's a crack in the window. Well, that's broken glass. That's a safety issue. Oh, hey, the carpeting is frayed. I could trip. That's a safety issue. Oh, the concrete is uneven. That's a safety issue. Does everybody see what I'm saying? I mean, you can turn almost anything into a health and safety issue. And so I would make sure that you temper the seller's expectations with those offers about, look, that's great that they put that, but let's be realistic. Anybody can turn anything into a health and safety issue. So take that with a grain of salt. But likewise, for the buyer's perspective, tell them this is what the seller's hearing when we say this. So make sure that you're realistic about whether that's what you're going to do. Everybody see what I'm saying? And likewise, Ricky, putting in the amount, how hard is it to find a contractor that can come up with a dollar amount over your amount?
Easy.
Yeah, so what's the point? I mean, now we're going to fight over whether the buyer's contractor was realistic or not when he said it was over $1,500 and you're like, no, that's only $1,000. You shouldn't have asked for it. Why get in the fight over that stuff? Your inspection already says you don't have to do it. Why not just say, well, that's nice, but we're not doing it, and leave it at that? I mean, your guys are trying to confine stuff and put stuff in contracts that I'm not sure you need to do. More importantly, the more you change the contract, the better you better be at drafting, because, you're doing additional provisions. You better be putting that lawyer hat on. The appraisal gap guarantees. But first of all, let me go back. I want to finish with the seller and some of the risks to the seller. Here's the other thing, and then we'll talk about drafting. I got all sorts of stuff, Anna. I don't know what. It'll be fun. Anyways, so the seller risk is, the other thing is this. Can we see where a market goes like this? And the buyer has a $60,000 appraisal gap guarantee. What's their earnest money? $5,000? So if the market shifts and the buyer looks around and says, well, wait a minute, there's 3 more houses on the market that are less money that I don't have to do this appraisal gap guarantee. What might that buyer do?
Terminate, lose the 5,000 and go off.
Why not walk away? Why not make offers on other property? The biggest risk they have is they lose $5,000. Does everybody see? And the problem with the appraisal gap guarantees is that sellers, when you get that offer in, they've already spent the money. They know exactly what they're doing with it. They know where they're spending it. They think they're entitled to it. They think everybody should get. I talked to my friend at work and he says everybody's getting $60,000 over appraised value because they're all experts. So keep in mind when you're talking to sellers, you got to temper those expectations and say, look, it's great that we got this offer, but keep in mind, market shifts, they may or may not stick around. So don't spend the money until we're sure we close. Does everybody see the risk there? Okay. And the only risk is the earnest money. And by the way, when it comes to the earnest money, and Michael knows this, what they're going to do is they're going to say, oh, and by the way, we're going to claim the earnest money because we're going to make the seller go through the mediation process and then possibly the court to get the earnest money, even though we know we defaulted. So, keep in mind that it's not, we have to make sure we're warning sellers that these are not guarantee transactions. You're asking for a premium. And when you're asking for a premium, there comes risk and we won't know until it closes. Is everybody following me?
Hey, Damian.
Yeah.
A lot of folks weren't around back in 2007 and 2008. But let me tell you guys that the first thing that happened out of the gate was when that market did, like Damian's talking about, and it shifted just like that. The first thing that happened was that the buyers dried up. When the buyers dried up, the prices started coming down. When the prices started coming down, those people who back in 2006 and 2005 that had overpaid for their homes, they began to complain to the banks because then they thought, well, the house down the street that's identical is selling now for $25,000 or $50,000 less. I don't know why I have to pay for my house as it is. And that's when all this litigation and stuff started happening and all these defaults started happening. So it wasn't immediate, but it was a situation where all of a sudden silence. And it was a weird silence. Like we were in the middle of a hurricane and we had arrived and there's no buyers. And it's just like all of a sudden your sellers are out there going, oh my God. And then you had that point where your listings shot up like crazy. because sellers got understood that that was the point. That was the point of this whole curve. And they had to get their home on the market. And it became this whole chasing down the market to try to find a buyer at that point. And buyers are like, nope, I'll wait till it curves back and it starts to go back up. So
Yeah, and we have no idea when that's going to happen or how far it's going to go down, guys. So I'm not trying to say the sky is falling, but you need to understand that's just basic economics. At some point, it will correct. And when it does, you have to be prepared for that. And you should be warning your sellers just in case they happen to be in the throes of a transaction when it does correct. And maybe understanding that appraisal gap guarantee is not, it's not a guarantee, despite the fact what everybody calls it. It's just, it sounds good. But at the end of the day, all the buyer's risking is their earnest money. And if you had a choice of spending $60,000 over what an appraiser says a property is worth, or buying one that's $60,000 less that does the same thing, what would you do? I mean, it's not rocket science. So again, that's why I want you to, to think about these things when you're advising either buyers or sellers as the market we're in and figuring out. The other risk to the sellers is that we get these appraisal gap guarantees and 60,000 over, and oh, that's so fantastic. Did anybody bother to ask the lender if the buyer could still qualify if he brought 60,000? Because keep in mind, in the lender's mind, that $60,000 might as well be flushed down the toilet. It doesn't exist anymore because it's not being paid towards equity. It's not being paid towards debts. It's not being paid towards anything. It's like you took that money out of the buyer's bank and you gave it to a stranger. And that affects ratios, and that affects reserves, and that affects qualifications. And so if you're representing the seller, you may want to go to the lender and say, okay, so if they have to pay the $60,000, can they still qualify? Because when they did the original pre-qualification, they probably assumed that $60,000 was going to stay in reserves or be used for down payment or something else. Does everybody see what I'm saying? Yep. So that's another risk to the seller that you may not know you have. I'll tell you the other one. Has anybody seen appraisal gap guarantees on FHA or VA?
Yes.
I don't think you can do them. What's any guess as to what the problem is, Ryan?
A mandatory clause.
There you go, Michael. Why?
Yeah, I don't know.
The
fraud.
mandatory clause says that if it doesn't appraise, you don't have to buy it.
Yes, that's exactly what it says. And everybody says, oh yeah, but we put the language in there that says, because the buyer has the option that he can go ahead and pay over if he wants to, but he doesn't have to. And the problem is that our contract sets out the escape clause for VA and the mandatory clause for FHA. And everybody thinks, well, because FHA has a blank that you can put in, then you could put the price at, say, 500,000 and then put in the FHA appraisal provision, you can put 450. But But hold on, Ryan. But right after you go under contract, what's going to happen is the lender is going to send the mandatory language to the seller with the purchase price in it. And the seller is going to have to sign that if he wants the buyer to move forward with the loan. Does everybody see where that's problematic? And what we're going to have is we're going to have sellers demanding earnest money from FHA and VA buyers that might try and terminate based on the fact that it didn't appraise. And I don't know what happens, because everything's in conflict. What I do know is that if FHA and VA decide that this was a wrongful practice, they might, as Donna was talking about, this is where I think the investigation does become an issue, is that if they investigate the brokers, they might decide, well, you didn't understand our mandatory and escape language, and you tried to keep the buyer's earnest money. Therefore, we're not going to let you be involved in FHA or VA loans anymore, or at least for a period of time. So that is a risk. And I don't think a seller can sign a mandatory language after they go under contract, which means the buyer can't go forward with their loan. Does everybody see how that's problematic?
Is it problematic if buyer still chooses to move forward?
Well, the buyer can choose to move forward. That's what the language says, is they're welcome to pay over it. Where the fight's going to be is when the buyer decides he doesn't want to move forward because we've had a tipping of the market and he wants his money back. And the seller, who feels wounded because, number one, he's not getting his $20,000 over the appraised value anymore, and now he's seeing the market shift, and to add insult to injury, he can't get the earnest money. Who do you think they're going to drag in?
Broker.
Absolutely. So
And the problem is there's no case law right now that tells what supersedes. So the government would supersede, I would think.
I don't think I have to worry about case law. Feds are feds.
Yeah,
That's the
you don't
problem.
want to get the feds involved in any of your transactions, and it's going to be a problem. It will.
I'll tell you what the feds did to one of my brokerage firms years ago when we actually had HUD listings, which was, a while ago. We haven't seen a lot of those in a long time. But at one point we had a broker who failed to deliver the earnest money on a HUD transaction. The broker was representing a buyer, okay? Was representing a buyer, wrote a contract, failed to deliver the earnest money. Buyer got cold feet, changed their mind, decided, nope, we're not going to do it. And HUD came in and investigated, and they said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take away your NAIDS number for 90 days for the entire brokerage firm because the broker failed to deliver the earnest money.
Location,
Mhm.
it's Dick's.
Okay,
Just to let you know, that would
there are
make you very
consequences.
unhappy.
Yeah. So, okay. But one of the other things I want to point out, guys, is that you guys are doing some real drafting now. I mean, we're doing all sorts of crazy drafting. And one of my favorites is I see these appraisal gap guarantees that say buyer agrees to pay $15,000 over the appraised value. Property was went under contract at 380, appraised at 350. And so the broker calls me and says, so what happens? I said, I don't know. Which side am I on? He says, what do you mean? I said, well, if I'm on the buyer side, I'm going to say the purchase price is 365. That's 15,000 over appraised value. And we're going to say that's the price and we're going to go forward. If I represent the seller, I'm going to say we never agreed to sell it for less than that. Obviously, the intent was to make sure it didn't that you would only pay up to 15,000 or appraised value. So we have a right to terminate. But I don't know. A judge gets to decide. Does everybody see the problem with some of these clauses? So here's the deal: is that you guys are real estate brokers, which is awesome because you're optimistic about everything. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to help this person buy this house and it's going to be great. And they're going to live here and it's going to be fantastic. And they're going to be on my referral list and they're going to be part of my sphere. And then I'm going to have all this stuff. It's going to be fantastic. Okay. Me, I'm a half empty kind of guy. In fact, rarely is there any water in the glass at all. Okay. That's the way I look at things, is because it's not for me, it's when am I going to get sued? Why are we going to get sued? And how are we going to get sued? But when you guys are drafting contracts, you are drafting as a lawyer. You have a license to practice law in a limited capacity as far as drafting contracts for your clients. That is not only your right, but your obligation. And so you have to be careful when you start doing that. And when you start drafting those provisions, you got to take off the broker hat about how everything's going to work out. And you got to put on the lawyer hat and think about, how is this thing going to go sideways 6 ways from Sunday? And you've got to start running your paragraphs or your additional provisions to ground. And what I mean is, what happens if it doesn't appraise? What happens if it's over appraised? What happens, everything else? Because if it's 15,000 or appraised value, what happened if it appraised at 380? Does that mean they're paying 395? You need to think through the entirety of what happens when it doesn't go as planned. Now, guys, I have drafted 3 different appraisal gap guarantee, well, three different appraisal clauses for you. One's a buyer clause that says if it doesn't appraise, price gets dropped to the appraised value. One's a seller clause that says that there's appraisal gap, and if it doesn't meet the appraisal gap, then we go back to the contract to figure out what happens. And one's a hybrid that says we'll pay the appraisal gap, but if it's more than that, then the price is dropped. Those are starting places. All of my clauses are starting places. They're not exactly ideal for every single situation, but it's a starting place for you to figure out how to make sure that you're accounting for everything in the contract. And I encourage you guys to start with those. And if it doesn't fit your situation, that's fine. Draft what you think fits your situation and then go talk to somebody about, hey, did I cover everything? And make sure that you're running your contracts to ground. You're spending a lot of time in additional provisions right now, which means that you got to be a lot more thorough than just filling out the blanks in the form of the contract. And that's where I see a lot of risk coming.
Damian, let me ask you this.
Yeah, Michael.
We've got a neighborhood, where 100 homes sell a year or what have you, right? So let's say historically price is 425, 450. With the market going crazy, everybody's paying 475, 450. I understand the argument that, all of a sudden this person paid, 50 grand above list and, that money's flushed down the toilet. But can't you make an argument that, look, 10 other homes have now sold for 500, which means the neighborhood's now a 500K neighborhood. So they didn't flush any money down the drain.
Absolutely. I mean, but that's the appraisal. What I'm saying is when it appraises for less than the purchase price, the appraiser is essentially saying it is not worth what you're paying. but we have to advise our buyer, and it's both directions, Michael. I'm not saying that we have to tell them, oh my gosh, the sky is falling, do not buy a house. What I'm saying is the market's headed up like this. It may catch up to your appraisal gap, and it may be worth that. It may keep going. It may keep going like that for months, maybe a year. And maybe what you pay now for 400 is worth 500 next year. I don't know, but it could easily go to the other direction. So Michael, what I'm saying is it's balancing to help them understand what they're looking at. This is, what concerns me is when we say, oh, don't worry about it because look at all the comps in the neighborhood, it's fine. I want to make sure they understand, market is headed up this way, and it could certainly be the best time to buy now because it might be worth 500 in a year, but who knows what it's going to, but it doesn't have to be. Does that make sense, Michael? Okay.
Damon, I got a
That's what
question for you.
concerns me. Hi, Dwayne.
Hi. Hey, so in my neighborhood last month, I sold a house at 605, and it was 50,000 over 4 months ago. What sold 557-ish, 4 months, 5 months ago. We took an offer at first for 588. That fell through, so we ventured to take the 605 offer, and it did appraise, which, I'm just as surprised as I can be. Now around the corner, they list a house at 645, another 50,000 over mine, and it's smaller. So if that house appraises, say that would be my listing, and it did appraise, is it best to put it in MLS that this house did appraise, there was no appraisal gap? Is it good to use MLS for that?
I honestly, I don't know how MLS looks at that or not, but I mean, if there's a field for it, then it'd be great because then you're helping the appraisers justify some of these prices that we're seeing so that like Michael's talking about, hey, this one didn't have an appraisal gap guarantee to appraise for this so that it helps them see that there is value. Now, most of the time what the appraisers look at is the sold value. They don't look at the appraised value, but that might be helpful to them to know that there was no appraisal gap in some of these.
Right, yeah.
They're just trying to look backwards at comps. And like I said, we're on a rocket ship right now. We're catching a lot of these appraisal gap guarantees and surpassing them. People have equity in their property. I just worry about when it tips.
Right. Yeah, because appraisers will call you, of course, from the past sales, they'll ask you, was the house updated? Was it this? Was it this? But I mean, it might help everybody if it does show that there would, like you said, wasn't an appraisal gap. The house was in good order. The house was ready to go. It was turnkey. So just wanted your advice.
Yeah, I think you can do that. I think you can certainly put that in and help the appraisers if there's a field for it. I just don't know how your MLS works because I know this is hard to believe, but I don't use your MLS. So I think it can be helpful, but my bigger concern is how are we advising our clients? How are we helping them understand what the risks are? Remember, your job as brokers is to advise your clients of risk and then let them decide what risk they're willing to accept. Where we get in trouble is when we don't give them a full picture of the risk. And some buyers in this market might say, what, it's just too crazy. I don't like this. I think I'm going to put it on hold. And if they want to do that, that's fine. On the other hand, some might say, gosh, I just don't see it going down. Sounds like 2006 all over again, but nonetheless, I just don't see it going down. So I want to buy now. I want to buy something. And I have 90,000 cash sitting there. I'm good. And if that's what they want to do, that's fine. We just want to make sure that we're giving them good advice as to what they're looking at and what their risks are.
And I had a question about that. So you're saying it's important to explain to our clients that there is a risk and there's no guarantee in anything. Is there anything in any of the contracts stating that? Because who's to say that they'll say, no, you didn't tell me that when in fact you did?
There might be something in the advisory, which might be why I created it.
But Tamara, you should follow up with an email on those kinds of conversations so you have a paper trail on what you've had a conversation with I should say. Always follow up with
I like email anytime you have conversations, but I will tell you guys, the advisories that I created for you goes through a whole bunch of risks that buyers or sellers encounter in a transaction. And the whole purpose of that advisory is to give you guys a script to kind of talk through with them some of the issues they're going to see, like people that want to move in early or people that want to pay stuff outside of closing or, not doing a survey or what happens on inspection and just all those different things. And this is one that's been added that talks about appraisal gap guarantees and inspection and the fact that it may not work out well for you. But I like you guys having the conversation with them because, every broker, I'm sure it's not every broker, but I would say the majority of brokers, they want to help their clients. They're not in this just to get a paycheck. They're in this to get a paycheck because they help their client make informed decisions and do a good job for them. And this is part of it, is helping them understand what they're facing so that they can make their own informed decision. That's what this is about.
All right, Damian, I got a question. I need you to help me talk me through this. This to me is all predicated on the fact that the appraisers set the value of a home. I believe that the buyer set the value of a home, and an appraiser's job is to explain to everybody how much a bank will loan. So if we're listed at 400 and the buyer's willing to go to 450 and it closes at 450, how is that now not a true comp in that neighborhood? The buyer agreed to pay 450.
It is.
Paid 450. So then that does become a true comp for the
Yes,
next.
but in order for the value of that home to end up at 450, there has to be more than just it. Otherwise, it's just an outlier.
Sure.
And if the market shifts and everybody goes down to 400 or 390 or 375, then the value of that home never hits 450.
Right.
It's the value of the home at the time.
And even the value of the home, I mean, what a buyer pays is what they're willing to pay. That's fine. But what I'm saying is that we have a lot of brokers, mostly your competition, that are out there talking about how, oh, don't worry about it. Oh, you need to buy this house. Oh, here's what you have to do to buy this house. And oh, don't worry about the 450, Ricky, because you know what? Once you buy the house, it's a comp and then your house is worth 450. And when the market tips, they're going to, you see, guys, I see a lot of things happening once we get past, you know, I've talked about all the other factors that we're seeing that have to work their ways through the economy. One of the other things that we're going to have to work our way through is the fact that right now, I think everybody thinks that they're going to work remotely for the rest of their lives. And I'm not sure that's entirely true. I mean, you've heard some companies say, oh, it's great. People working remotely have been productive and they don't have travel time and everything else is wonderful. I'll tell you, I've talked to a whole bunch that say it's abhorrent. They have people that don't do any work during the day. They do like 3 hours of work and then they go play with their kids or they go play with their dog or they got to do laundry or whatever the case may be. And then they quitting times at 5, regardless of what they got done during the day. And I think that there's going to be some evaluation by companies about the productivity of their workers. They're not doing it now because we're in a pandemic. Nobody wants to lay people off in the midst of a pandemic. But at some point, particularly if we hit more of a recession, we're going to see more and more companies starting to reevaluate productivity. And some of that evaluations are going to be, do we need to bring people in more so that they're not at home left to their own devices? Or do we need to just lay people off to try and save money because we're now headed into a recession? But either way, I think those are conversations companies are going to have at some point. It may not be till next year, but at some point they're going to have that conversation. And that could hurt these people that think they're living at that, you know, and then all of a sudden you get laid off, you know, you probably aren't going to be able to afford your house anymore. And if you were at that tipping point, you know, you lost your job, you paid $50,000 over appraised value, the house is worth $50,000 less than what you paid for it, and you lost that money and you don't know what, I mean, you're desperate. And so they're going to look for solutions and somebody else who duped them because it wasn't their fault. Okay. And I know I've said that a couple times, but I just want you to see where the risk is. What else you guys got for me?
Damian, can I ask you one off topic here?
Sure. Why not?
Okay. On the old COVID advisories where
It wouldn't be a meeting without talking about COVID.
well, the COVID amendment. So, you know, essentially says if there's a breakout or if there's a shutdown, we extend closing, et cetera. But I've got buyers and sellers who are being told not to sign it. And that's because they've checked with an attorney who has said, I don't like this form. It puts you at a disadvantage. You should probably just negotiate it when it occurs. But it's a required form for us.
Well, I think we probably need to talk about that. I'll tell you, the reason it's a required form is that early on in the pandemic, it was a necessary form. We had, you know, go back to the beginning, we had shutdowns, we had title companies that were shutting down and MLOs that were shutting down and clerk and recorders that were shutting down. And, you know, and there's no force majeure clause in the contract. And so all of a sudden you had people that were supposed to perform that just literally could not. And
Right.
So, you know, the addendum came from CAR got a lot of pressure to put something together. They couldn't put anything together because the laws don't allow them to create something that's contractual in nature. So they went ahead and went to the real estate commission. Real estate commission said, have you met the attorneys on the forms committee? Those jackasses can't get anything done quickly. So I'm one of those, but nonetheless, yeah. So then the commission and Carr turned to the real estate section council, and literally they got the request on a Thursday, and the section council had a form created by Tuesday for you guys. And that's where it came from. And early on in the pandemic, it was definitely a worthwhile form. Since then, what's happened is that we've had a lot of, the industry has adapted. There aren't shutdowns. We're getting better numbers. I don't like it being required anymore just because I don't think it's as necessary as it once was. I think it's a tool to keep in your toolbox, and to keep in mind that if we have a shift or if there's an increase in cases or something, then it may be something worth using again. But I think we probably need to talk to compliance about maybe that shouldn't be required right now.
Okay, thank you.
Well, coming from compliance from our end, I am not dinging at anybody in my office that doesn't have it. And if you get it signed, fine. If you don't, that's fine. Even though it still says required, you don't really have to have it. But if you do get it, I just okay it, move it on. So it shouldn't be an issue in anything that you send me to review.
Okay, thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Hey,
All right,
Damon,
I got
a
about
question.
4 more minutes and then I got to run. So what else you guys
Damien, I
got?
have a question about, we've been
Holly,
working with-
Holly, you look a little different than I would expect.
I know, well, I couldn't get, my husband was playing in our Zoom account and he put his picture in, so I got stuck with it.
I see.
Quick question on we've been working with a lot of builder communities and we have no control over the contract, and it does a poor job of protecting our clients. And you have to, hush, Mark. And you always have to deal with, that. And I have a buyer that, bought a condo. We're closing in a couple of weeks. And, it says you don't have to use our lender. You don't have to use this, but you can't change lenders within 30 days. But it's a condo that's spec. So there's no way to even get the information within 30 days. So, I couldn't even protect, their deal was good, but it didn't even allow us because, it says in there, you don't have to, but you sort of had to.
Well, so first of all, you don't have any control over that. You just have to advise your clients that the contract is what the contract is from the builders. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, they're unfair. That they're hope and pray transactions, as I like to call them. And what I tell a buyer is this: do you want to buy a new home? That's great. What you're going to get is you're going to get a builder contract that has all these things that say this is what we can do to the buyer, and you can't do anything to us, and it's not enforceable against us. And if you want your money back and everything else, then you're probably not going to get it. And if you'd like to have a lawyer review it, you certainly can have a lawyer review it, but I guarantee they're not changing anything. So do you want to buy the property or not? And if they don't want to take those risks, Holly, then don't sign the contracts. But that's the risk with it.
Hey, Damien, I got one other question. Has to do with post-closing occupancy agreements. In the section 3 of the contract and the dates and deadlines, what date is possession? Is it the date of closing, or is possession the date of possession transfer on the post-closing agreement?
So first of all, it's possession. I hate the way the contract is set up, because if you have so here's the thing: if there is a lease on the property or post-closing occupancy agreement, that is granting possessory rights to somebody else until the lease ends or until the post-closing occupancy agreement ends. Okay, so the possession is really after the post-closing occupancy agreement ends. So for possession, to me, in the contract, I would just probably put post-closing occupancy agreement instead of putting a date and time in there, because you're never actually delivering possession to the buyer until after the expiration of post-closing occupancy agreement. Okay. Real estate, you've heard this when you did pre-licensing. Real estate is a bundle of sticks. And one of those sticks is a possessory right. And so if there is a lease that's, the bundle, you take out and give the lease to the tenant, then when the buyer purchases the property, they get the whole bundle of sticks, but they don't have that possessory right stick because somebody else has it. Same with post-closing occupancy agreement. that stick is being given to the seller, so the buyer doesn't get it back until after the post-closing occupancy agreement ends.
Right, so Damian, that said, when we do that, let's say we have a PCOA in place for 60 days, and 30 days into it, the seller is able to give possession to the buyer 30 days early. So there's refund due.
Yep.
Should we do an A&E to clean that up, to clear up that this is the day that we
It's already
actually
closed.
to them?
But no, it's already closed, so you can't do an amend extend because amend extends can't happen to contracts that are done. But
Okay.
if you look at the language in the post-closing occupancy agreement, it actually says, now whether it's prorate or not is irrelevant. I mean, it says in there whether it's prorate or not, but it says that the seller can give notice and move out early. And the purpose of that is to make sure that it's clear that the seller is no longer insuring an interest in the property if they give that notice and they leave early. So there's no need to do any kind of amendment to it.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank
Anybody
you, Damian,
else?
for coming on.
You bet, guys. That's all I gotta go. Sorry, Anna, I gotta go see somebody else.
Thank you for your time.
You bet, guys. Hope I didn't take too much time. Have a good meeting. See you later.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming up. This was streamed internally on our Facebook page. So you can refer back to that if you missed something in our office and with Highlands Ranch. We've got the recording. We'll get out to you guys as well, so that'll be available if you missed something inside of there. Have those conversations with your managing brokers. If you learned something today that you want to explore further, if you have more questions for your managing broker or for Damian, feel free to shoot those over. But that's all we got today. So enjoy an early break on this Wednesday afternoon. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Bye, guys.